Alright everyone, I wanted to talk about how our current problems with tech censorship are at least partially generational. Now, of course, preface to this, when we're talking about generational shift and stuff, we're using aggregates, we're using collectives. I'm not a collectivist, I'm an individualist. I do understand, of course, that not every Gen Xer is a sellout that wants to censor the internet. I understand that, and I know there are plenty of Gen Xers in my audience. Just like not every millennial goes to Starbucks and writes slam poetry. Hell, I don't. You know, I sit here and write lyrics to retrowave. Two different worlds. Some millennials are like, save the whales, I'm wearing a dead buffalo. It's just the way that it goes. But part of it is generational. Think of it this way. When Gen X was younger, like in the 90s or something, when tech starts to become big, internet goes public, .com bubbles up and then collapses. Poor Bush. There's one thing that wasn't his fault and still got blamed for. Everything else was definitely his fault. Tech bubble bursting was not. Anyway, and by the way, there'll be a social media bubble burst at some point. That'll be fucking weird because, you know, then alt tech will probably grow up in its place. These people were younger. A lot of them were like dropouts and really didn't fit in. They were social misfits, to tell the truth. They were sort of like the weird kids that became the cool kids and then could buy and sell all the preppy kids, which is a good thing, I think, for society. It's good that that sort of nerdy crowd created the early internet because it's helped it remain good longer, although it's declining right now because of tech censorship. The problem is that those same Gen Xers that became more and more concentrated, power in fewer hands, they got corrupted by their money and power a little bit, number one. And number two, because of pure generational shift, the sort of political situations of their youth stuck with them. So you've got to understand it in the context of sort of the Clinton through Obama political paradigm, where the outsiders, the ones that were outside were the further leftists. They felt suppressed. They felt like America's, it's you know, religion is suppressing us. There's too much right-wing moralism, and they're not wrong. There definitely was back in the 90s. And so they were fighting against that largely. They wanted the internet, you know, early on they were very libertarian. Like Dorsey sounded like a total ANCAP at first. Bill Gates was very libertarian in his views, at least it seems. Steve Jobs, before he died of AIDS, was definitely part of that. But you've got this situation where those same people now, they're still mentally fighting that same fight despite the fact that there's been a total paradigm shift. The same left that they helped bring to power is now the abusive party. The problem is old habits die hard. Most people don't keep that in mind. They keep fighting those same fights. That's why I switched over because I'm more of a pure libertarian, I think, in the Luciferian sense. Back when the paradigm was you know, progressive, and I use that term in the small p and very loose sense, the values of progress that were being promulgated by the left, like not burning books, not caring if your kid reads Harry Potter, not beating people up for being atheists or gays or something, the tolerant, more pro-liberty aspect of culture that was being promulgated. I was a liberal, basically, then, if you fixated on those issues in which abuse was clearly happening. Now, though, people think that I'm on the right. It's not. I'm not a conservative, but I've switched somewhat because of the paradigm, because now the people that are being suppressed are the other people. Now, it's partially the fault of the conservatives of the past era. It's partially the fault of, like, the Bushes and people like that, because they created the power structures necessary to abuse people based on their socio-political beliefs. Now, though, you have a situation where it is increasingly difficult to even really exist in the world without having a significant tech presence. It's not just for people like me. I'm a content creator. My income comes from the internet. But what if I just have a topical job? Well, you have a LinkedIn for your business profile. If your business probably has a web page, probably email and everything. It sells some merchandise online. A lot of businesses do, even if they're brick and mortar. You know, here you can buy Uncle Jed's gas station shirt and hats and other paraphernalia. It's got like a dead wood truck that's been run over by their pickup truck on it. And it's very funny and makes them a little extra money or something. Here we sell our famous keg pickles or something like that. You can sell it online. You can make money. And so if you get deplatformed, if censorship comes for you, if the grim reaper of authoritarianism comes and slices you up the ass, it makes it much more difficult to exist even in the physical, tangible world. Or if a lynch mob of censorship-loving craptivists comes and smears your name and defames you and says weird shit and gets like a big lynch mob going, they can get you totally fucked up in real life, potentially. Because they can get that outrage mob can target your business, get you fired, they can threaten your family, they can stalk and harass you in real life, attack you potentially, and do crazy shit. You know, vigilantism. I would say, a form of terrorism, but, you know, they consider themselves righteous. It's sort of like Antifa calling itself anti-fascist when they're fighting for multinational corporations to deplatform people offline. Yeah, okay, you know, whatever. Your confused worldview gets more confused by the fucking day. Sad, lonely, bitter individuals with nothing better to do than be corporate pawns. They call themselves anti-fascist. No, the funny part is the anti-fascism of today, oddly enough, has more in common with, like, the far right at this point. Really, it does. It's almost surreal, because when people used to say that that would happen, like people on the right, like back when I was a liberal, I would laugh at them. And now I realize I was actually wrong at the time. They are technically correct. Now, I think that that's just part of the paradigm, and that's the thing. A bunch of people with more liberal beliefs, at least in some ways, a bunch of fucking Californians, basically in the literal sense now, run the internet, at least these larger firms. And so they've retained that Gen X mentality of orange man bad. I think they see Trump as a fixture of the 80s and 90s paradigm, which is not entirely wrong. I mean, he definitely was. But he was never, far right anyway. He was part of, like, the Stern fan people and stuff. He was practically a whack packer and shit like that. Would say weird jokes and did weird skits and, you know, had his show and stuff. I don't see that as particularly fascistic, but I know at least among my generation that's still a minority opinion for some reason. So I think that that's part of the problem, is that Gen Xers largely run these big tech firms. And then you get an exception like Zuckerberg. He's a millennial, technically speaking, kind of, sort of. How old is he? I think he's a few years older. I think he's like 35 or something. He's one of the older millennials. But he's still from that generation. Then he's from a paradigm where, you know, leftism good, right-wing bad anyway. Sort of carries on into the early millennial days, sort of petering out now. I think Gen Z, I think, has more hope than we do. Might have to wait for Generation Alpha. I might be 70 years old before a truly sane generation comes along. Be crazy. You know, when the Gen Xers are seeming like the sane ones, with the exception of the ones that happen to control the internet, at least insofar as content creation goes, you know that there's a problem. Oh, these people that were raised on Beavis and Butthead and MTV and Jackass are now basically running the communications industry in the entire Western world, and they're getting away with it as part of a massive vertical monopoly system encouraged by a bunch of liberal billionaire politicians and their corporate backers. Yeah, what a wonderful world, Hong Kong. It's basically, you know, sort of the way I think of it. So it's generational. So now the youth has to rise up and overthrow that paradigm too. Thankfully, technology will save us. It goes in waves too. There will be a coming collapse of the big tech firms. It'll be messy for content creators too. Like, you know, we've established a presence on these sites, and first you get to platform, then the site disappears and you have to build it somewhere else. It'll be difficult. I'm not going to lie. There are difficult times ahead, even when the tech paradigm of censorship ends and wanes and the social panic goes away, which it will. Even when that ends, there's still a structural technological problem that we're going to have to go over, and it's one hell of a hurdle. Most people, I think, will make it if they've, you know, sort of built themselves up substantially enough, if they're quick enough. Why do you think that every time there's a new significant alt-tech presence, I jump right onto it? Because I'm convinced that I'm going to need those presences in order to survive over the next, you know, even 10 to 15 years, not even that long term. I'll still be relatively young, and the whole paradigm will be collapsing in on itself probably. So I'm not willing to take any risks. That's about all. Peace out.